So I'm making this video to discuss the proposed Occupied Territories Bill. To understand it, I'll give a bit of context. To give the context, I will explain a bit of Palestinian-Israeli history. I will discuss the West Bank in a bit more detail, and I look at the politics of the Occupied Territories Bill. So the Occupied Territories Bill was first introduced in the Dáil in 2018 by Senator Francis Black. It proposes to ban the import and sale of any goods produced in occupied territories or illegal settlements. So it's not just for Israel, it's for any country in the world. So in Israel it would affect in Palestine it would affect the West Bank and Gaza. At the moment Israel illegally occupies both the West Bank and Gaza, so any goods produced by Israel in these areas would not be allowed to be imported or sold in Ireland. To understand why this bill is necessary, I'll discuss a bit briefly the Palestinian history, particularly focusing on the West Bank. So in 1917, after World War I, Britain took control of Palestine. Following this then, in 1921, Arthur Balfour, the Foreign Secretary of the UK, released the Balfour Declaration on behalf of the government. So this declared that Britain would support the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. At the time, 80% of the Palestinian population were Muslim Arab, 10% were Christian, and 10% were Jewish. So the vast majority were Muslim Arab, and they were, of course, very opposed to the establishment of a Jewish homeland in their country. Why did Britain want to establish a Jewish homeland? Why did they want to establish Israel? Well, part of it is that they thought that Israel could essentially act as a colony for them in the Middle East, which they controlled a lot of following World War One, following the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So they thought that they could essentially, the Jewish settlers could establish a colony for them to oversee their control of the Middle East. As well as that, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Europe and in Britain as well, so they saw this as being a way of ridding themselves of the Jewish problem that was across Europe, that they considered to be across Europe. So the declaration led to mass immigration from different parts of the world, particularly Europe, of Jewish people to what was Palestine. So over the next 20 or 30 years, Jewish people migrated to Palestine. In 1947, then the United Nations announced a partition plan for Palestine. So they decided to split Palestine between Palestine itself and Israel, which would have been the home country of the Jewish settlers. So as part of the plan, the Palestinians would have gotten less than what the Jewish people would have gotten. They would have gotten the less arable land. The Jewish people would have gotten the best farmland. And as well as this, 400,000 Palestinians at the time lived in the Jewish land, in the land that was designated as Israel as part of the partition plan. So that was about 1/3 of the Palestinian Muslim population. So of course the Palestinians didn't agree to give over half of their country to foreign settlers. They opposed this, and a war essentially started between Palestine and the Jewish settlers, who were backed by the British military. In 1948, Israel officially established itself as a country, and the following day the surrounding Arab countries, Egypt, Iraq and Jordan, all invaded. In the next year, Israel defeated these countries and captured 78% of historic Palestine, so they captured much more than what they were given in the original plan. This period of time, the 2 years of war, is also known as the Nakba. 700,000 Palestinian Muslims were expelled from their homeland, from their homes, and entire towns and villages erased by the Jewish settlers and the British military. So about 70% of the whole population of Palestine were expelled from their homeland. That's called the Nakba, which means catastrophe. So following this, about 22% of what was Palestine was now Palestine. You had Gaza, which we see today, and the West Bank. So these two small areas of land. Gaza was controlled by Egypt and the West Bank was controlled by Jordan. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel annexed both the West Bank and Gaza. So it became the occupier of 100% of what was Palestine. In 1993, the Oslo Accords sought to establish a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So it was agreed that Israel would give governance of the West Bank and of Gaza back to the Palestinian Authority over time. As part of this, the West Bank, which is the area to the north east of beyond Israel to the northeast, the West Bank was divided into three different areas. Area A, Area B, and Area C. So Area A accounted for about 18%, Area B accounted for about 22%, and Area C accounted for about 60% of the West Bank. So to picture what the West Bank looked like and still looks like, if you can imagine different small disconnected islands within an ocean, in that kind of diagram, areas A and B are the small disconnected islands, and area C is the ocean. So each part of area A and B are surrounded by area C. So area A is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, area B is controlled by the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli Civil Administration, and area C, which surrounds areas A and B, is controlled by the Israeli Civil Administration. So essentially the Israeli military. So for Palestinians to travel between different areas of different parts of area A or B, they very often, most of the time, they have to pass through parts of area C. So they're forced to go through very strict checkpoints, very abusive checkpoints, where they're pushed up together, forced into small, tiny spaces very often. Very little room to breathe, very little room to move in these tiny passages, and in a very abusive way. They also have a very segregated road system, the Palestinians, so they use separate roads to the Israeli settlers. So the Israeli settlers, most of whom live in Area C, they have bypasses which they can use to bypass all of the towns in Area A and B. So about 700,000 Israeli settlers now live in the West Bank, most of whom live in Area C. About 2.7 million Palestinians live in areas A and B, and about 300,000 live in Area C. So for these 300,000 Palestinians who still live in Area C, the Israeli governed area, which accounts for 60% of the land in the West Bank, it's impossible to get building permits to build housing. So a lot of these Palestinians, they build anyway on their own private land because they're forced to, because they can't get building permits. In a lot of cases, this housing is then demolished by the civil administration, so it's bulldozed, or else it's dispossessed from the Palestinians and given to Israeli settlers often as well. So in 15 years, Israel have demolished 11,500 Palestinian structures. Since October 7th, the oppression has peaked. The choking of the Palestinian spirit has truly peaked. In May 29th, the civil administration, which oversaw all civil matters for settlers and for Palestinians who live in Area C, handed over the control of building regulations and the management of parks and farmland to the settlement administration. So the settlement administration, different administration, that's headed by a man named Bezalel Smotrich. So Smotrich is a far-right Israeli minister. He's a finance minister, extremely far-right. He's been very vocal about how he doesn't consider Palestine or Palestinians to really exist, how he considers the West Bank and Gaza and even Jordan to be a part of Israel based on religious justification, essentially. So he now manages the parks and the farmlands, and he controls the building regulations. So this gives him the power to authorize construction of new settlements, which have massively increased in the past year since October 7th, and the demolition of existing Palestinian homes, which has also drastically increased. He's been vocal about how he's been praying for the annexation of Palestine, also of the West Bank. by Israel and how he has the support of the government. So since October 7th, there have been 11,700 arrests in the West Bank alone. So nothing to do with Gaza. In the West Bank, there have been 11,700 arrests, 3,500 of whom have been arrested using administrative detention. So this is a form of arrest that allows the Israelis to arrest Palestinians with no evidence of crime or proof of any crime. So they can arrest them on the basis that they think that they will commit a crime in the future, not that they have committed a crime, but they think that they will. So it essentially allows the Israeli military to arrest any Palestinian on this basis, incarcerate them indefinitely without even providing the person that they arrest with any evidence or any reason as to why they are being arrested in the first place. So this is used very often to arrest non-violent peaceful protesters and political figures there isn't any evidence to build a case against, so they can essentially just arrest these people anyway. Since October 7th, settler violence has also peaked in the West Bank. Itamar Ben-Gvir, another extremely far-right Israeli minister, has distributed thousands of semi-automatic rifles to Israeli settlers and far-right Israelis who support the settlement regime, most of whom do anyway. Between October 7th and July of this year, there was 1,606 incidents of settler attacks on Palestinians according to United Nations statistics. So settlers are essentially allowed to attack Palestinians anytime they want and act without any restraint, and are very often backed by the Israeli military as well. 783 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th, nothing to do with Gaza, entirely separate to Gaza. 783 have been killed in the West Bank, 171 of whom are children. So these children who have been killed by Israeli settlers and the military include a 4-year-old who was sitting in a taxi with her mother at a checkpoint in the West Bank. They include multiple children who were shot for throwing stones at Israeli military vehicles. They include a 14-year-old boy who was shot while playing with his friends at an olive tree, who the Israeli military confirmed to have shot and later said that he was a mass terrorist who threw stones at a military vehicle. So they consider a 14-year-old boy who throws a stone at a vehicle to be a terrorist. Death of these victims is very often insured, because Israel typically, the military don't allow, once they shoot someone, they don't allow any aid to be permitted on the site. So they don't allow the loved ones of the person who was shot or any surrounding people to enter the site to help them or to try to get help for them. So essentially they force people to watch the person die over 20 minutes or 30 minutes very often without being allowed to help them. If they do try to help them, the military will shoot at them. So children now are dying at a more rapid rate than ever in the West Bank. So politically, Israel has never been sanctioned by any Western country, even any Northern country, as far as I'm aware. Israel has been condemned massively, particularly since October 7th, since it started its war on Gaza. It has been continuously condemned by many countries in the global north, but no action has been taken whatsoever by any countries in the north, as far as I'm aware. So the Occupied Territories Bill, again, it would ban the import and sale of goods produced in the occupied territories and illegal settlements of Palestine. So goods produced by Israel in the West Bank and in the West Bank and in Gaza, it would ban the import and sale of these goods to Ireland. So while this specifically wouldn't put massive pressure on the Israeli economy, it would send a message to Israel and to the world that Israel can be held accountable for its actions and that action can absolutely be taken against Israel. Following this, it is possible that it could essentially become a catalyst for other countries to follow suit. So it could absolutely inspire many other countries to pass similar bills that sanction Israel in similar ways, which would over time then mount far more economic pressure on Israel than just Ireland alone would. So the idea is that this would be a deterrent to Israel building more settlements and would hopefully over time force them to remove the existing settlements in the West Bank as well, and give the governance of the West Bank back to Palestinians and Gaza, because Israel is at present the illegal occupier of the West Bank. So Israel have been very vocal about how they don't want this bill to be passed. Their Minister for Economy, Yassim Ackerman, has been vocal about how he doesn't want it to be passed, and he will look at different routes of preventing it from being passed. So why has there been such reluctance at a government level to pass this bill? Well, the legal context changed in July. So the ICJ ruled that settlers in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, the settlements were illegal under international law, and that they amounted to long-term annexation of the West Bank, of Jerusalem and the West Bank. So this confirmed the legality of the bill. It confirmed that Israeli settlements in the West Bank were absolutely illegal. So it confirmed the illegality of it. So it gives it a bit more strength in court. There have been different attempts by different parties to block the passing of the bill. So 2019 documents have been leaked that suggest that Pascal Dunham had a call with the Israeli finance minister to assure him that the bill wouldn't be passed. In 2020, Simon Coveney and Fine Gael used the money message to block the passage of the bill. So a money message is a mechanism that the government can use to block the passing of essentially any bill that they want to delay, so they can kind of block it indefinitely while they're still in power, based on the basis that it would cost the economy, that they don't know how much it would cost the economy. So since it has come up again recently, the government have insisted that they absolutely intend to pass the bill, and they intend to pass it in a timely manner. However, if they had truly intended to pass it as soon as possible, they absolutely could have worked on it in the months between July and the election. They had time to work on it, to work on the passage of it. However, they chose to sit in it and not make a single change to it, which they say is needed. They say the change is needed, but they chose to not make any changes whatsoever and to sit in it until now. So in the past few weeks, then they have brought it up again, and they've said that it's absolutely ready, as if essentially they're ready to go ahead with it if they get elected again in the next term, but they just ran out of time. But reality is they had a lot more time to work on it, but they chose to not work on it, and they chose to sit on it for these months rather than working on it, and to bring it up then closer to the election to give the impression that they are going ahead with it and they have every intention of passing it. So Micheál Martin has said that the government will need to make it more robust so that it stands in EU courts, and he referenced France's case with the Western Sahara, which France lost. This case is very interesting because I think it's not an example of how Ireland might lose a case, it's an example of how Ireland might win a case. So the case with the Western Sahara was the European Commission wanted to include the Western Sahara in their trade association agreements with Morocco. So they sought for this to be recognised in the European Court of Justice, for the Western Sahara to be recognised as being a part of Morocco for the trade association agreements. However, the International Court of Justice don't recognise Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara. So at present, since 1975, Morocco have been the occupier of the Western Sahara in the same way that Israel are the occupiers of the West Bank and of Gaza. So Morocco do not have any sovereignty over that land. It is not a part of Morocco, and that land has its own indigenous population, the Sahrawi people, who the ICJ have also ruled have a right to self-determination and to self-governance on that land. So essentially the European Commission and France wanted the Western Sahara to be considered to be part of Morocco in the European Court of Justice for trade association agreements, so that Morocco could essentially take the resources of the Western Sahara and include them in the and sell them to the EU as part of the trade association agreement. However, the Sahrawi people, the indigenous people, won this case because they are the native people of this land, and the Morocco and the European Commission lost this case. So the European Union lost this case. So if anything, this is an example, I believe, of how how the Irish case with the Occupied Territories Bill could be very successful in court. It is an example because in this case the occupier lost this case, and the EU lost this case, and the people who were being occupied and oppressed, the people who were being colonized, they won this case. So the Sahrawi people, so this would be the equivalent of the Palestinians winning a similar case against Israel in the European Union, in the European Court, which is absolutely possible. So Ireland wouldn't be the first governing body to ban the import and sale of goods from the occupied territories of Palestine. The Brussels City Council also banned the import and sale of goods from these territories. To justify their ban, they looked at the EU Trade Association Agreement between Israel and the European Union. So in this Trade Association Agreement, it states that relations between parties shall be based on human rights and democratic principles. So very clearly at present, according to the ICJ ruling, which rules that in July that Israel's occupation of the West Bank and of Gaza is absolutely illegal and amounts to long-term annexation, according to this, relations are not based on they're clearly not based on human rights and democratic principles, particularly in the West Bank and in Gaza, where the people are being occupied. So these areas of land should absolutely, based on this, not be included. And based on the Moroccan case with the Sahrawi people and the Western Sahara, if the Western Sahara cannot be included in any trade association agreement between Morocco and the EU, then the West Bank and Gaza should absolutely not be included in any trade association agreement between Israel and the EU. So just to conclude, the Occupied Territories Bill, again, it would ban the import and sale of any goods that are produced by Israel in the occupied territories of the West Bank and of Gaza. So at present, it wouldn't affect Gaza because there isn't any settlement in Gaza. However, following the end of the genocide that is being perpetrated in Gaza by Israel have been vocal about their intention to build settlements in Gaza. They have also been continuously expanding settlements in the West Bank. So the hope is that might not act as an immediate deterrent to Israel expanding settlements, but if other countries, Ireland is a very small country, we don't import a lot, we wouldn't cost the Israeli economy a lot of money. However, it could absolutely inspire other countries, particularly people from other countries, to start to lobby their governments to pass very similar bills over time. So if other countries, if it's taken to the European Union, if the European Union are forced to do the same, to not include the West Bank and Gaza in trade association agreements, if other countries are to follow suit over time, pass similar bills that boycott the occupied territories, goods produced by Israel in the occupied territories, this could mount a lot more pressure, a huge amount of pressure on the Israeli economy, and could absolutely prevent the expansion of settlements, and possibly hopefully over time it would lead to the removal of settlements from the West Bank.